Hello, everyone. Welcome to our MintCast live stream. This is an interview series featuring dissenting voices the establishment would rather silence. I am your host, Mnar Adley. This is the official MintPress News podcast, so you can also find the audio version on any of your favorite podcast streaming platforms. We are currently live right now on YouTube, Rumble, and Rockfin. And as always, this podcast is viewer funded, so if you'd like to support us, you can become a member of our Patreon. We always appreciate when you like, share, and subscribe. So today we're going to be talking about how under the cover of the US proxy war in Ukraine, Ukraine is undergoing economic shock therapy, including a massive privatization drive and attacks on worker power. So right now, the rich are taking advantage of this crisis to buy state resources and land at very low prices, while undermining Ukrainian labor rights. This is all part of a process that the most powerful people in the world have done repeatedly to countries and communities in crisis, as highlighted in Naomi Klein's book, The Shock Doctrine. Now, President Zelensky has recently passed bills targeting workers' rights and their ability to form unions. Yet, whenever Zelensky is presented within the media, he's always depicted as a war hero, especially by the Western left. So, who is the real Zelensky and why is he being idolized by the Western media? So, today we are joined by Max Blumenthal. He's the editor of The Gray Zone, who has done a lot of reporting on Zelensky, that the media doesn't want you to know about. Max, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me, Mnar.
So it's very good to see you. As we are speaking today, Max, it has recently been announced that Zelensky has been voted Time Magazine's Person of the Year. What is your reaction to this?
Well, I had to laugh. And he has an interview with Dave Letterman coming up in a subway station in Kiev, which you have to now refer to as Kyiv because you have to use the Ukrainian pronunciation of everything, which even many Ukrainians, or maybe even most Ukrainians, weren't all using until the Russian language was essentially officially marginalized. But Dave Letterman's in the, this was filmed in October. He's in this subway station. And Dave Letterman, he makes himself look like a biblical prophet now. He's like his true self. He doesn't have to be corporate anymore, except he's doing the most corporate thing possible, which is to interview Zelensky and make Zelensky look like this hardened war hero who's so courageous. And Letterman actually claims that he has to be in the subway station because Russian bombing is so intense, when daily life in Kiev continues pretty normally, except with a lot of electricity blackouts. But the point is, the whole Western media still continues to treat Zelensky as this heroic Nelson Mandela type figure and ignores what he did this week, which was to outlaw the Russian branch of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. They're rounding up priests as we speak in Kherson, along with members of the Jewish ultra-Orthodox sect Chabad, who stayed behind in Kherson to tend to their people and their parishioners when it was Russian territory before the Russian retreat. And so they're all being punished now and accused of Russian collaboration. Who knows what's going to happen to them? This is the way Zelensky's been running the country, especially since the war broke out. And we've reported, you can look at my reporting at the Gray Zone along with Esha Krishnaswamy, on the Pinochet-style regime of disappearances, assassinations, torture, arrests of all of Zelensky's opposition, including his most popular and prominent opponent, the leader of the Ukrainian Patriots Party, Viktor Medvedchuk, who was kidnapped and tortured by the Ukrainian SBU security services this year after his party was outlawed. I mean, this is a guy you can find appearances in 2019 of Zelensky having these buddy photo ops with. It was like, it looked like Obama and McCain from 2008. The next thing you know, he disappears this guy and throws him in a dungeon. after outlawing his party and 12 other political parties, outlawing all opposition media. So that's the political side. And, many mayors have been assassinated who have attempted to negotiate civilian corridors with the full express support of Zelensky's interior ministry. We know about the kill list, Mirotvorets, which, even prominent American figures, Roger Waters, Scott Ritter, former UN weapons inspector, are named and targeted. Their children are on this list. Hundreds of journalists have been placed on the list. This is run by the Ukrainian Interior Ministry. This is the kind of authoritarian hardline regime that Zelensky is presiding over. But then you have the economic side, which goes hand in hand with this Pinochet-style regime. It's very similar to Pinochet, except without the military uniforms and the goose stepping. You have a former comedian who now suddenly claims that he has this rich Jewish heritage to win over Western liberals, and he recently, actually, this was in what month was this? Yeah, it was in September. So right after Zelensky signed the law that you mentioned in August, where he essentially outlawed unions. 70% of the Ukrainian workforce is covered by this law because it targets SMEs, or small to medium-sized enterprises, which have less than 250 employees. You're now not allowed to form a union. A few weeks after signing that law, Zelensky rang the bell at the New York Stock Exchange by video. It's just a ridiculous image of him seated in his presidential chair by video with all of these corporate chieftains and Ukrainian representatives cheering at the New York Stock Exchange. Alex Rubinstein covered this for us, and I think this is one of our best and really most concise articles about what this war represents. The headline is Zelensky rings New York Stock Exchange bell as euro dips below dollar. This was also at the same time that the destruction of the EU economy had begun in earnest. And I can tell you, I was just in the EU. I was in Portugal, where we were disinvited from this major tech conference under orders from Zelensky's wife, Olena Zelenska, me and Aaron Mate. And then, I went to Rome for a little while, and the EU has never been weaker. My dollar has never gone further, and it was not so easy to find a hot shower. But at this point, Zelensky had hired, or at least his government had hired, WPP, which is one of the top PR firms in the world, in order to sell multinational corporations on Advantage Ukraine. If you look at him ringing the bell in the NYSE at the stock exchange, there are flags, Ukrainian flags, on each side of him, and they both are emblazoned with the logo of Advantage Ukraine. Advantage Ukraine offers the best investment opportunity since World War II, according to Zelensky, to invest in Ukraine's economy. And which companies are they offering as investment targets? SMEs, small to medium-sized enterprises, the same companies that are being officially de-unionized, where unionization is officially blocked. And as I mentioned before, opposition figures are being jailed. These also include labor rights activists, Communist Party activists like the Kantarovich brothers, who have been in jail and are now under house arrest simply for organizing for labor rights. And Zelensky's offering this investment menu under Advantage Ukraine. The investment menu is every public asset. He's offering the financial rape of the Ukrainian public holdings, of just straight up asset stripping. Basically, the same project that took place in Russia in the 1990s will take place in post-war or contemporary Ukraine. And this is actually a project that has been continuous since the 2014 Maidan coup, which was triggered by the government of Viktor Yanukovych, who's considered, they always call him pro-Russian, But basically what he did was he wanted to arrange a deal to provide for gas and imports and exports to Ukraine's traditional largest economic partner, which is Russia, because they're right next door. And what the
Right.
EU was offering him was an association agreement that would have resulted in austerity and would have prevented them from trading with getting cheap gas in the winter from Russia, which is just right there, or cheap grain from one of the world's largest grain providers, or exporting their grain right next door. And when he said, no, this is impossible, and the privatization, as corrupt as this government currently is, this is too much privatization, and I'm not going to sell out our workers to this degree. This is all very well documented. And that's when the coup began. So since 2014, the Ukrainian government under Petro Poroshenko, who wasn't even, he's essentially the leader of a military junta. Under Poroshenko, the government ended their restriction on GMOs. And this was done under intense lobbying from Monsanto and Dow. And then they began selling off their farmland to these multinational corporations. The asset stripping began right away after 2014. I mean, I can go into even more detail about what was taking place before, under Yushchenko, for example, who came in under the first Western backed color revolution, the Orange Revolution, backed by a coalition of CIA-tied oligarchs and the USAID and so on. I mean, this guy's wife was actually a former staff member at the Heritage Foundation in Washington.
Wow, that's one of the most hawkish think tanks in this country.
It's hawkish, but it's essentially the outsourced brain of the Republican Party, and it's just full-scale deregulation and privatization is what they plan for Congress every day. So they managed to slip in a Heritage Foundation cadre in Kiev after the Orange Revolution in 2004, and those same laws that they write for the United States, deunionization and privatization, they just cut and paste it for Ukraine. So this is a long-standing project, and it's being carried out now under cover of war, along with all this political repression. And Western liberals are happy to forgive it all because, their brains were completely hacked by Russiagate, and everything is forgiven that Zelensky and Ukraine does just to stick it to Putin.
And that's exactly what it's all about. Is at the end of the day, this is just a war against Russia. But there's a lot to unpack with what you've been talking about. But really quick, I just want to play a video of Bono playing in the metro station in Kyiv, because the amount of celebrities that have kind of jumped on this bandwagon to promote this war is also quite ridiculous. And it's the reason why people on the left have basically fallen for much of this propaganda. I'm just going to play this video really quick. And why you have a lot of young people promoting this anti-Russia sentiment. Where is it? Here we go. So somehow, like you said, I mean, there's all of these Russian bombs that are being dropped. So they have to go into this subway, and yet they have the most sophisticated lighting and camera personnel, and like everything set up to be like a really great performance.
Yep. And you can imagine people from New York or Hollywood actually consulting on these phony displays of hoopla. Like it's the exact same lighting that you see for the mock late night TV set when Dave Letterman descends into the subway. The exact same lighting. I'm sure it's the same subway station, and probably some PR firm from Madison Ave came in to consult on it. And you look at who they're bringing in. I mean, they're the biggest tools. Bono, he's Mr. Davos.
Well, yeah,
and I need to go in a shelter, for a cringe shelter, after watching that. And I really feel sorry for Benny King, the brother Benny King. I mean, how many cheesy white guys have ripped off that song, and now they're doing it with soldiers of an army that officially integrates neo-Nazis. I mean, it's disgusting. It's a disgusting rape of the soul tradition of the U.S.
Well, and both MintPress, yourself, and many other independent journalists have covered how this kind of same integration and working with PR groups and, you know, groups like the White Helmets, you know, how
Yeah.
do they work with PR groups to formulate really sophisticated videos to promote within Western media? It's not unlikely, it's not unheard of. I mean, these things take place, like they've happened in the past before. So it's not some sort of conspiracy that it could happen again in this war. And this is the war that the media is obsessed with right now. Can you imagine when we're talking about Zelensky here, who's being presented as a war hero? And if you look at that Time magazine picture, I mean, his eyes are they turned them into blue, even though his eyes are actually brown. They've really idolized him in a way that is attractive to the Western audience. Can you imagine if, you know, leaders of resistance movements fighting US imperialism were presented in the same way within Western media? They're not. They're presented as terrorists, you know, and so there's a clear agenda here in the way that Zelensky is presented as a war hero, and so I want to talk about the weapons that are going into Ukraine. I've interviewed people before on this podcast about, you know, where are the weapons going? Well, it turns out that only about 30% of the arms are actually reaching the Ukrainian military. You tweeted, Max, I'm going to pull up your tweet here. And I think we're going to watch this video right now. My guy who's supposed to be helping me with my live streams power went out, so I'm going a little bit slower in presenting. So just give me 1 second. So you tweeted this out. This is a CBS news report. So CBS was forced to apologize under Pentagon pressure for this report, showing that most military aid to Ukraine was unaccounted for and likely flowing into the hands of criminal mafias. Too much transparency too soon, apparently. Do you want to talk about this before I play it, or should I play it and then you talk about it?
Well, just to follow up on what you mentioned before,
Yeah.
every war or color revolution now plays out on Instagram. And
Right.
if you're not on Instagram and you're not following it, you won't understand how these wars or regime change projects are being marketed. They're all marketed through influencers. And I think one of the most important things an investigative journalist who's anti-imperialist or concerned about these kind of events can do is to look at how these influencers are being recruited. And that's why you're seeing among young people so much suppression of their traditional anti-war tendencies, and support for these kind of operations. And, you know, you have experts doing the data mining and the psychometric research to understand what soft spots to hit in the minds of millennials and Zoomers. And then they just pound it again and again. We saw Mia Khalifa, the former Lebanese American porn star, recruited to promote. She was one of the first people to promote the Patria y Vida, or no, it was like Diaz Canal is a bastard hashtag, when these tiny protests broke out in Cuba, which are rare in that country. And it triggered a massive explosion of hashtag, viral hashtags. And, you know, the color revolution in Cuba played out more on Instagram than it did in the streets of Havana or anywhere else. And a lot of what you see in Cuba is because they have an energy crisis. People are just going out in the streets because their fans aren't working, and you just got to be out in the street, and people get angry and hungry. But, this core group that was leading these protests in Cuba were also in their own right Instagram influencers who were the product of the open internet arriving in Cuba starting in 2015, which was a condition of the Obama normalization deal. So it was inevitable that a figure like Zelensky would rise as the global influencer of the main proxy war that the West is waging. I'm sure we'd see one. A Taiwanese figure would have to be branded. And the back to the Time magazine cover, Mnar, since you mentioned it,
Yeah.
you know, they could have they did the same thing with the White Helmets, who were essentially a public relations operation that was spun out of a PR firm called Purpose, based in New York and London. I remember going to the White Helmets meeting at the Atlantic Council when they were introduced to
Wow.
BC. And seated in the front row were a bunch of PR agents I recognized from Purpose, along with David Petraeus and every other spook who was working on Syria. And the problem with the white helmets, though, and you just look at take the Time cover and juxtapose it with the white helmets cover. The
Should find it.
problem is the white helmets are brown people who happen to also consist of Al-Qaeda members who had long beards. They were not very marketable to the Western public. So when we saw the white helmets, we were mainly looking at rubble or children being pulled out of the rubble, and they had to obscure the actual figure of the white helmets because these are not sympathetic figures. I mean, for one, because part of the Western public is just simply has racist attitudes towards Arabs and Muslims, but also because, in fact, many of its members were, and if you looked at their Facebook pages, were posting images of Osama bin Laden or the Al-Qaeda Jabhat al-Nusra flag or the ISIS flag. With Ukraine, you got white people, white Christian people, and Zelensky has Jewish heritage, which is perfect to market to like coastal liberals who might be irritated or upset by the Azov battalion and them sig heiling and bearing Wolf's Angle style Nazi insignia. So he's this perfect figure. And it's why so many Americans were working on his campaign in 2019 and working on branding him and getting him in there. Look at his predecessor, Petro Poroshenko. He's an alcoholic guy with a big chest who has his, kind of scowl. He's a hardline nationalist, doesn't have much personality at all. He's not as marketable. And then they show the people of Ukraine behind Zelensky because they're the white people. They're just like us, and they're being bombed by Russia. So we finally have the perfect, worthy victims for the West, and it's not just liberals.
Yeah.
I mean, you go to Republican Orange County, and you'll see Ukrainian flags all over the place.
I was just about to say that. I mean, I go to the grocery store and everyone's bumper sticker is a Ukrainian flag. And all I can think about is like, where are all the Yemeni flags? Where are all the Palestinian flags? Yemen is facing the world's worst humanitarian crisis. Over 23 million people are starving. In Palestine, Palestinians are living under Israeli occupation and apartheid. And yet you don't see anybody changing their flag, profile pictures with that flag. So it really goes to show just how much or how well that propaganda campaign works. So
what's taking place in the West Bank now is completely ignored in Western media. I mean, how many deaths have we seen? Killings of young men have we seen in the past 3 weeks, including killings on camera? You'll never see it in Western media, like executions on camera.
Yeah, I mean, the death of Shirin Abu Akleh, I mean, if that happened in Ukraine, if a Ukrainian journalist was murdered the way that Shirin Abu Akleh, the Palestinian journalist, was murdered on live TV, that would have been treated a lot differently than her death was treated.
Shocking. I mean, she was a Christian. She was, according to Ned Price, State Department spokesman, known to our post, meaning she would actually, check in and she got to know the U.S. consulate personnel there in the West Bank. She was keeping them informed on the situation. She was working for Al Jazeera, which has a very good relationship with the U.S. government and is considered it's basically a mainstream outlet. And she was the premier reporter in the Palestine. Across Palestine, she was known to everyone.
I grew up watching her. Palestinians grew up watching her. She was like their icon.
Yeah. I mean, I think of any iconic U.S. journalists. I can't compare them because they're all such sellouts, but I mean, Diane Sawyer or something. But how did the U.S. treat her? They completely threw her under the bus. Just completely threw her under the bus. So yes, it's all about geopolitics, imperialism, and yes, racism.
All right, so let's watch the CVS video real quick.
Historic flow of weapons coming into Ukraine. Do we have any sense as to where they're going?
We don't know. There is really no information as to where they're going at all.
All this stuff goes above the border, and then kind of like something happens, it kind of like 30% maybe reaches its final destination.
30%? Are you concerned about weapons getting in the wrong hands?
I don't care at all whether that happens.
What sort of a unit do you command? Can't say. Okay. The U.S. has sent tens of thousands of anti-aircraft and anti-armor systems, artillery rounds, hundreds of artillery systems, switchblade armored drones, and tens of millions of rounds of small arms ammunition. But in a conflict where front lines are scattered and conditions change without warning, not all of those supplies reach their destination. Some also reported weapons are being hoarded, or worse, fear that they are disappearing into the black market, an industry that has thrived under corruption in post-Soviet Ukraine.
I can tell you unarguably that on the frontline units, these things are not getting there. All right, drones, switchblades, IFACs, they're not. All right, body armor, helmets, you name it.
Is it safe to characterize this as a little bit of a black hole?
I suppose if you don't have visibility of where this stuff is going, and if you're asking that question, then it would appear that it's a black hole, yeah.
As we fuel Ukraine with so much of this, isn't there a danger that we're just creating the next insurgency, the next failed state?
That's one of the reasons we have to win the war. I mean, if we lose the war, if we have this kind of gray zone, semi-failed state scenario or something like that, that's why we got to win. If you do this, you funnel lots of lethal resource into place and then lose. Then you will have to face the consequences.
I love that.
Okay.
We have to win the war, or things will turn. Winning the war means pumping far more weapons into Ukraine than currently we're seeing.
Well, just this Friday, we had the White House announce a new $275 million, Ukraine defense assistance package. And then we have British PM Rishi Sunak promising Zelensky new deliveries of anti-aircraft installations and air defense missiles. And so the United States and Great Britain are just pumping Ukraine with weapons. I mean, millions of dollars worth of weapons. I don't know what the total amount thus far is, but it appears that clearly only about 30%, and I'm guessing probably even less, of those weapons are actually arriving and going to the actual Ukrainian military. Where are the rest of the weapons going? I mean, what is happening right here?
Well, they're all going to the wrong place. I mean, the fact that they're all going to Ukraine means they're going to the wrong place, because why were they going there in the first place? Hundreds of millions of dollars were authorized, by the way, in December 2021 to escalate this proxy war, right around the time that the Organization for Security Cooperation in Europe started noticing a massive buildup of Ukrainian forces in the so-called gray zone in the Donbass, which is what precipitated Russia's invasion. Right around the same time, cities in Donetsk were getting shelled with Grad rockets more than they had in years. Something was brewing. So this was always going to the wrong place. The whole point was to turn Ukraine into the anti-Russian, aircraft carrier that's unsinkable aircraft carrier, sort of like Israel is in the Middle East. And that is a massive provocation to Russia. We always hear, this is Putin's unprovoked invasion. If you read like New York Times or CNN copy in an article that's supposed to just be a news report, they'll say 3 weeks after Putin's unprovoked invasion. It's like their editors force them to say this. Maybe it was an invasion. It's an invasion, but it was one of the most provoked invasions in our lifetimes because of the West dumping its arms in Ukraine. So yes, and now we know it's obvious that it's not going into the hands of the right people, whoever they are. But who are the right people and who are the wrong people? In 2016, Congress reversed its prohibition on arms going to the Azov Battalion, this neo-Nazi regiment. And then in 2018, finally authorized it thanks to the efforts of Ro Khanna's staff. I don't think Ro Khanna was really totally understood what he was doing.
Yeah, because he's always presenting himself as anti-war, Ro Khanna.
Yeah. But then I caught him on Capitol Hill in early March, right after the proxy war broke out, and I staked him out. So I'm like, here's the guy who, you know, banned weapons to Azov. Maybe he'll have something interesting to say. And I waited for him for like an hour outside a cafe, and he came out and he, you know, started speaking to me, and he sounded like one of Ronald Reagan. He sounded like Alexander Haig or something when he was talking about, this is a good war. This is a great war. And we have to fight for freedom. We're fighting for freedom, and we need to send them all the arms they need. So there goes your prohibition on arms to the Azov battalion, because who was occupying Mariupol at the time, or supposedly defending Mariupol? The Azov battalion. And tons of Western weapons started flowing, are continuing to flow into the hands of the Azov battalion. Who's doing all these so-called cleanup operations in Kherson? It's the battalions, the neo-Nazi and criminal battalions. And they're getting the weapons. So maybe the weapons are going into the right hands with them. But then you have the wrong hands, which would be criminal mafias, people who might sell the weapons on the black market, and then they go to mafias outside of Ukraine. We recently saw several. I was actually in Italy at the time. This was, you know, all over the news. I saw it sitting in a cafe that 5 Italians had been indicted, all members of the misanthropic division, which is a wing of part of the international wing of the Azov battalion. And they were accused of plotting to blow up police stations in Naples and city administration centers. One of them couldn't be reached because he was currently in Ukraine fighting with the Azov battalion. So you have CBS actually finally reveal this to the US public. And what happened? The Pentagon put pressure on them, and there was a massive freak out by Ukrainian Twitter and NAFO and, you know, their little troll farm to pressure CBS into retracting. And CBS apologized for that report, which was just a factual report. I think, you know, it's public interest journalism. These are our tax dollars, and Americans want to know where their tax dollars are going. And they apologized. And I think they removed that promotional trailer you saw, and removed the 30% number from it, because they didn't want to offend their partners. It just shows what CBS is and what journalism is today. So why, you know, when they, you know, the person who said the 30% figure was part of the essentially he was a person on the ground that's helping USAID get aid in there. This is not, you know, Noam Chomsky, or this is not Michael Parenti. This is not me or Mnar Adley. It was someone who's part of the operation.
So that number could be far less for all we know.
Definitely, but it's also just telling that they would say that. They're frustrated, but who's not frustrated? Who's happy about this? It's the people in Troy, Alabama, at the Raytheon plant, which Joe Biden visited this summer to celebrate the record number of Javelin missiles that had been produced and sent to Ukraine, not because it was turning the tide of the war, but because it was producing jobs in a state like Alabama, which just relies basically on military Keynesianism, if you could call it. No offense to John Maynard Keynes, but you know, that's what this is ultimately about for Americans, and this is how our economy is structured. And if you actually go to the first 5 seconds of that clip, you can go back and play it. There's a logo there.
Hold on, here it is. Present.
Hey, I'm on a live stream with Mnar.
Right now?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I only have an hour.
Where is? Oh,
Say hi to the MintCast audience. Anya says hi.
Hello, Anya.
All right, I'll call you after.
Okay, ready? So play the first 5 seconds.
Yeah, you'll see there's a logo that shows up right there. Okay, you can just pause it right there. Okay, that's Saint Javelin. Look at that logo. I don't know if you can blow it up as full screen.
Yep.
Yeah. So you can see it's the Virgin Mary holding a Raytheon
Wow.
anti-tank wire-guided Javelin missile. I don't actually know if they're wire guided, but they're, pretty advanced anti-tank missiles. And so they're conferring holiness upon this weapon. St. Javelin is actually an American organization, but you're seeing this logo show up actually in Ukraine. And it is part of the NATO organization that Alex Rubinstein has written about in a series for us at the Gray Zone, where it's a component of this organization. So NATO poses as this club of people who are simply supporters of Ukraine, and they hate Russia and they hate the invasion, and they're taking the fight to anyone on Twitter or any social media platform who is remotely critical of the proxy war. But they're also a fundraising operation for the Ukrainian military and these criminal mafias that are connected to the Ukrainian military, specifically the Georgian Legion, which is led by a Georgian warlord who's been involved and boasted about war crimes, executing prisoners, who's been accused of carrying out the sniper operation in Maidan Square in 2014, credibly accused. And he's worshipped by the NATO crowd. And St. Javelin is, I don't know if you can hear a sneezing cat in the background. But
Yeah, I heard a dog or a cat. Go ahead.
My cat just sneezed. So this is all about Americans raising money on Twitter for a gun running operation to a criminal mafia that boasts about committing war crimes, that actually did carry out war crimes against captured and wounded Russian soldiers. They executed them on camera happily. This footage went around the world back in April. And here you have their logo showing up in this 60 Minutes report. And it all goes back to Troy, Alabama, to the Raytheon plant. And it goes back to the Northern Virginia suburbs where new McMansions are being built for Raytheon executives and their lobbyists and Lockheed lobbyists who are selling the HIMARS system, and to Orange County and to Colorado and everywhere else, Texas, where the arms industry has personnel and factories in the US. And the US is actually struggling to keep up with the orders. Meanwhile, Canada is basically emptied its storehouses of heavy weapons to send to Ukraine. The US is begging former Soviet states to send their surplus MiGs and other artillery pieces that Ukraine needs to replenish its supplies, because they've produced so much for Ukraine and sent it over there, and it's either been used or sold off. So this is great business. Great
Absolutely.
business. And,
look
we
at
also haven't mentioned, sorry to cut in, we haven't mentioned liquid natural gas or the blowing up of the Nord Stream pipeline, the worst active industrial sabotage of our lifetimes, was great for Exxon. I saw some of the oil trade publications actually pump out headlines. Nord Stream sabotage creates a unique opportunity for ExxonMobil. I mean, because Europe can't get the gas anymore from Russia, so who's going to supply it? It's Texas. I mean, they were popping champagne in Texas. Actually, in Dallas, their skyscrapers, which are, housing the offices of Exxon and the other oil industry, local producers, they light up with the Ukrainian flag at night, towering over the city of Dallas.
I mean, look at this article from the Atlantic Council. I mean, if it could not be more obvious what the military industrial complex is, this is like the article that everybody should be reading. And I'm going to link it in the comment just so everybody can check it out. But so I read this article a couple of weeks ago. And I mean, just as the title says and indicates, this is about Ukraine's top NATO priority. Again, it's about NATO. Should be weapons, not fast-tracking membership. So and this whole thing is about all the weapons that Zelensky should be adding to his shopping cart, literally the shopping cart, and how he should just stop talking about membership for right now and just focus on, buying up all these weapons.
I mean, that's amazing. That's a great headline. That's a really good catch. Because what it's saying is that NATO's dangling membership before Kiev and telling them, if you just fight this war and fight to the finish,
Yes.
we're going to let you in our club. The EU's dangling membership in too. That means, Ukrainian refugees and migrants all get to be EU citizens. That would be a dream for a country that already had some of the worst human outflow in the world before this war broke out. But they're never going to get it. They're never going to let them in the club. They're just using them to sell weapons. And that's what that headline explains perfectly.
Let's talk about Germany. I'm trying to formulate my question here, but it looks like Angela Merkel gave an interview to a German newspaper in which she said the 2014 Minsk agreement was an attempt to give Ukraine time. They used that time to get stronger, which you can see today. So in this interview, she basically admitted that the West never had any intention of abiding to the Minsk Accords and simply used them as to tool up Ukraine.
Yeah.
I know you saw this story. I think you tweeted about it. What did you make of that information? What did we learn from this whole situation?
Well, my tweet went viral because this story really, this comment, which is one of the most important quotes of the war, was not getting around in English language media. So I knew she had said it, but it was only in German media. So I just kind of put it out to my following and it went viral because people were shocked. And still, Western media, which is even covered Merkel's interview, it's one of her first major interviews with, I think, Der Zeit, her first major interviews with German media since leaving office. Der Zeit, since leaving office, Politico covered her interview. They didn't even mention that quote. I mean, it's amazing how they're studiously ignoring the most important thing she said. And what she said is what former Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko also said publicly, which is that we needed the Minsk agreement in order to put new facts on the ground. In other words, to build up our military, to try to advance past and expand the gray zone around Donbass and get ready for the big war that's coming that the West wants us to fight. And that's what Merkel revealed as well, that they knew this was the whole point of the Minsk agreement. The Minsk agreement was not about negotiating the final status of Donetsk and Lugansk. It was not about a final agreement between those republics, those breakaway republics, and Ukraine to bring peace. It was actually for the coup government in Kiev and its NATO backers. It was about building up for war. And what does this remind us of? It reminds us of the Oslo Accords. Israel signed the Oslo Accords with the Palestinian Authority, brought back Yasser Arafat and his crew from Tunis to Ramallah, and knew that it would never negotiate a final status agreement. And actually, when Arafat and Yitzhak Rabin, then Israeli prime minister who would soon be assassinated for signing this agreement, shook hands on the White House lawn, most of the Palestinian Authority delegation, the PLO delegation, had not seen the details of the agreement yet. And Hanan Ashrawi, who actually had stayed in the West Bank, wasn't, detached from this all in Tunis. When she saw the agreement, she flipped out. She said, there is no final status. There's no mention of borders here. We didn't get anything. So they can continue to put facts on the ground under cover of negotiating and wanting peace. And it's, so when Rabin was assassinated and Ehud Barak came in from the Labor Party, that's when the most settlements were built in the occupied West Bank. It wasn't under Netanyahu. It wasn't under Ariel Sharon. They actually pulled back settlements, unlike the Labor Party, which signed the Oslo Accords. The Labor Party was much more sophisticated in the way that it was dealing with the occupation. And what Israel successfully did was convince the Western media, the liberal intelligentsia, that it wanted peace because it signed this agreement, while it took peace after peace after peace and built up its military in the West Bank and sealed off Gaza, essentially made preparations for these catastrophic assaults on the Gaza Strip that took place during the Obama administration. That was all thanks to the Oslo Accords, the separation wall, the apartheid wall that runs through Palestinian communities in the West Bank would not have been possible without the Oslo Accords. And the buildup of the Ukrainian military and the provocation of this Russian invasion would not have been possible without the Minsk agreement. So this is why you see resistance movements across the Middle East or these people's militias in Donetsk and Lugansk speak out so strongly against these phony negotiations.
It's all theatrics. That's all
Yeah.
theatrics. Absolutely.
It's-
I think that
Yeah.
that's their purpose, is to kind of give this farce that we have some sort of peace agreement, but usually those peace agreements mean, like you said, to grab more land, expand borders, steal more resources, and it's really the people on the ground that suffer the most from those kinds of agreements.
And then when the agreements are thrown away and revealed as charades,
Yeah.
it gives a lot of legitimacy and momentum to the groups that the West considers extremists. People turn to them because, for example, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, they were one of the groups that never supported the negotiations. Whereas PFLP, traditionally the Marxist-Leninist group in Palestine, they actually went along with Oslo, and they lost so much legitimacy. In the West Bank, they were, for a time, basically reduced to a bunch of NGOs. And Palestinian Islamic Jihad never participated in politics. They said it were just a pure resistance movement. Hezbollah in Lebanon, same thing. And you see it as well with the armed groups in Donetsk and Lugansk. Putin himself said that he's made noises suggesting that he regretted not going in immediately after the Maidan coup. Now knowing what he knows about the Minsk agreement, the Russian foreign ministry invested so heavily in it, although it wasn't the lead negotiator. It was banking on something happening there to prevent this catastrophe, and they gave up, invaded, and here we are. And so I continue to blame the collective West for the catastrophe of this proxy war, and it's because of them that we see no negotiations to end it, and this war will definitely continue well into 2023.
Well, and not only are they not negotiating and to end this, but it's like they're burning everything down with them along the way to make sure there is no room for peace. I mean, you have done a lot of really great reporting at the Gray Zone with Klarenberg and others about the blowing up of the Kerch Bridge and the Nord Stream pipeline. I mean, when that took place, it was like, are we just trying to start World War III here? Like, what are we trying to do? What is the whole point of that? It's like we're just burning everything down with us.
Well, yeah, and Western correspondents, or figures in the EU officials, husband of Anne Applebaum, the Washington Post correspondent, who's neocon pundit, who's pals with Hillary Clinton and a board member of the National Endowment for Democracy. I'm forgetting his name right now. I mean, he's openly celebrated the attack on the Nord Stream pipeline and basically gave away the whole game. Whereas, the perpetrators wanted some plausible deniability to be able to blame Russia. But then you have the Kerch Bridge.
Yeah.
What is the Kerch Bridge? This is one of Putin's hallmarks of his legacy. What is one of the hallmarks of Putin's legacy? You could say it's a symbol of Putinism, along with the World Cup being hosted in Russia, him securing that, along with, his prosecution of some of the oligarchs or ending the Chechnya war, South Ossetia, but that winning, defeating Georgia, smacking down McCain at the 2007 Munich Security Conference. These are sort of these memories or milestones of Putin's legacy that he wants to be remembered for. But the Kerch Bridge was really a symbol of Putinism. $4 billion invested in this very high-tech bridge using sophisticated engineering to connect Crimea to the Russian Federation and basically bring back Crimea. That was the point of attacking it. The point was to attack Putin's legacy and to provoke him personally. Similarly, similar to the assassination of Daria Dugina, this analyst whose father was painted in Western media as Putin's brain, which was completely false. But the point was to get at Putin, to provoke Putin. And so the point is they succeeded. And what did the provocation lead to? It led to attacks on Ukraine's electrical grid, which has been horrible for Ukrainians and has plunged a majority of their population into darkness in the winter season. I gotta pause for a second and I'll be right back. If you can just take me out of the studio, I'll be back in 30 seconds.
Okay. All right. Well, first of all, I just want to thank everybody for joining us. We're not done. We just have, maybe 15 more minutes left with our stream. Max Blumenthal just had to step out for a second. He's going to be right back, as you heard, hopefully within the next 30 seconds to a minute. And for those who are joining us, just to help us beat social media algorithms, if you could share this live stream where you can, hit like and subscribe. MintPress News is independent watchdog journalism, and we are continuously reporting on the permanent war state. And if you are following the coverage that we have, we've done really incredible interviews, especially in the last couple of months, with really prominent names. So we really appreciate everybody being here. If you guys have any questions that you'd like Max to answer, you can go ahead and put them in the...
All right, I'm back.
You can put them in the comment section.
Someone called me a flake in the...
it's yeah.
So yeah, the reason I had to sign for a package because I'm getting some new studio equipment because we're trying to improve the quality of our live streams at the Gray Zone. So
thanks. We're in the same process too. Good.
Well,
yeah,
happy
that's
to collaborate.
Amazing. So I want you to continue talking about the Nord Stream, now the Nord Stream pipeline as well, and some of the reporting that you guys did on that, in addition to the Kerch Bridge. You talked about the Kerch Bridge, but also the Nord Stream pipeline, the way that British intelligence were potentially, allegedly involved in that. I mean, do we know who for sure blew up the pipeline?
I mean, it's pretty obvious who benefited.
I know. Right.
But yeah, we have a pretty clear indication that British intelligence was involved in the Kerch Bridge attack because we have documents that we published, internal documents that were confidential, circulated among a group of military intelligence operatives who produced a blueprint in April for attacking the Kerch Bridge. And they were furnishing it to the Ukrainians, but we also, and this is Kit Clarenberg's reporting, we also published a follow-up report by Kit showing that that same group of military intelligence operatives, they run a consulting firm called Prevail, which is contracted by the British Ministry of Defense, and their director, Chris Donnelly, one of their directors, Chris Donnelly, he headed the Integrity Initiative, which we've reported on, MintPress has reported on, was kind of like a media warfare operation to generate anti-Russian hysteria throughout Europe and the US, and was run through a front think tank. So they're operating on many fronts, but they were actually kind of trying to legitimize the idea of attacking the Kerch Bridge. They proposed torpedoing it or hitting its support structure with drones. But they also had, as we revealed, raised up, actually cultivated a secret terror army of what they called Ukrainian partisans to attack targets in Crimea. And they got a Ministry of Defense contract to do so. So this was an active project. And look at what happened. I mean, it's an ongoing project. And attacking Crimea, as I said before, is a red line for the Kremlin. This is considered Russian Federation territory, non-negotiable. And so they're essentially attacking the Russian mainland in the minds of the Kremlin. And that's why the Kremlin escalated and began attacking the electrical infrastructure. Remember, Putin referred to the invasion as a special military operation back in February. And when you call it an SMO, special military operation, that conveys certain legal guidelines. Putin was essentially saying, we will attack the Ukrainian military, destroy the Ukrainian military, and we will denazify Ukraine. So we will destroy the Azov battalion and that structure of fascism that has been terrorizing the ethnic Russian population inside Ukraine. But they avoided attacking the electrical infrastructure, doing a kind of shock and awe attack on Ukrainian government buildings until all of this took place. So behind the scenes, the British military intelligence apparatus was pushing for this insane escalation. And, we also revealed documents showing emails that Chris Donnelly had produced for his team, where he's complaining about Biden warning of nuclear Armageddon and actually calling for undermining Biden and undermining anyone in Biden's national security kitchen cabinet who might be amenable to giving up Crimea. And the way to do that is to keep the terror attacks coming and to keep provoking Putin. And what Donnelly says in this private email is that Putin will never go nuclear. He will never go to that level. So let's just keep poking the bear. These people are such dangerous psychos. Anyone who says that does not care about the future of humanity. And that's why it's important to expose these figures, because we actually care about human survival.
Well, and what's so funny, Max, is that because you care about human survival and because we care about human survival, whenever we talk about the threat of this rise of also Nazis in Ukraine, like with the Azov battalion, we are called like Putin apologists. Like we're just doing, we're just doing the same narrative as Putin and Russia in this conflict. And I actually spoke at 2 events in the last 6 months. And both times there was one Ukrainian at each event that it was almost like they were given the same script or trained. I mean, I don't know who these people were, but 2 people, one at each event, that said exactly the same thing to me. Oh, well, Ukraine's plight against Russia is that like of Palestine. Okay, that was one thing they said. Another thing that they said was that, why do the anti-war movement keep talking about the Nazis in Ukraine, the Azov battalion? They just make up less than 100 members, and they're just like, they're not even known in Ukraine. They're not even known. That's what those 2 people said at my event. They tried to, debate me. So we clearly have this group, this initiative, I guess you should say, to kind of to minimize the Azov battalion's, their efforts in Ukraine. Where does that come from? I mean, how active are they within the Ukrainian military?
Well, they were just on tour across the U.S. and being welcomed at huge halls. The New York Documentary Festival welcomed one of their photographers who'd been posing with pro-Hitler insignia and, the number 88, which stands for Heil Hitler. I mean, probably saying that will get you demonetized. Just me saying that, even saying that it's bad
this
to
whole
say.
thing is probably demonetized, this whole conversation.
To paraphrase Kanye, I mean, these people love Hitler. They love Hitler. They say so. Not all of them, but many of them. Why? Because Hitler was the key patron of Stepan Bandera when he and his organization of Ukrainian nationalists, along with Roman Shukovich's Ukrainian partisan army, were fighting the Soviets and the Soviet control over Ukraine. So these were the fathers of Ukrainian nationalism. They're George Washington's, and they were Nazi collaborators. They are heroes to most Ukrainians who are part of the kind of Galician tradition. So too is the Galician SS division of the Nazi third military, presided over by Adolf Hitler. You can see Galician SS insignia on Ukrainian tanks currently in battle right now. That's just a tradition that needs to be whitewashed. It's hard to whitewash it when you have like the Canadian foreign minister, former foreign minister, is now deputy prime minister, basically the second most important politician in Canada, Chrystia Freeland, waving a red and black Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists flag on Ukrainian Pride Day, just proudly holding up this flag of Nazi collaborators who carried out pogroms against Jews and Poles and ethnic Russians, who is Chrystia Freeland's grandfather, Michael Chomiak, who ran a Nazi-funded newspaper. It was funded under the watch of Joseph Goebbels. He not only did that, he edited the encyclopedia of the Ukrainian Encyclopedia Britannica. It's like the Ukrainian online encyclopedia. Chrystia Freeland did a lot of entries there. Go look at the entry on Stepan Bandera. It paints him as this hero of humanity. I mean, you can't, it's so hard to paper over that tradition that I think would turn off most American Jews, certainly, but most decent Americans if they actually understood it. So there's been a PR effort to confuse them and to paint this all as some kind of Russian talking point.
Yeah.
And they've been doing that since 2014. I remember when during the Maidan coup.
Yeah, you did reporting on the Maidan coup and how Israel was even training the Azov battalion. I mean, we published that work.
Well, Haaretz, the Israeli liberal publication, like they're one of their premier, their oldest newspaper in Israel, reported that Israel was arming the Azov battalion. I mean, you can see these Azov guys showing up with Tavor field rifles, the same rifles that you'll see Israeli soldiers bearing in the West Bank. But back in 2014, I was reporting for publications like Alternet on the presence of neo-Nazis in the Maidan Square. And it was then that this group called C14, one of the most hardcore, ideologically hardcore bands of neo-Nazis, had stormed the city hall in Kiev and covered its walls with flags like the Confederate flag, the German Third Reich flag, with the swastika at the center, along with flags of the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists and other Nazi collaborator groups. And that really shocked me at the time. So I reported on it, and you could just go on YouTube and see video after video that they themselves published. And the most shocking aspect was when the Ukrainian Berkut, the riot police, raided City Hall and kicked them out. Where did they take shelter? In the Canadian embassy. The Canadian embassy opened its doors to these neo-Nazis. So it was obvious the West was backing them. It was cool with neo-Nazis being involved. And now they're, and mainstream media would report on it. The New York Times, Deutsche Welle, all of these outlets reported on the troubling presence of Nazis in the ranks of the Ukrainian military and in Ukrainian society. Amnesty International, even in Ukrainian, had a report on how these groups had gotten so strong and ferocious that no one in Ukraine was safe. They were attacking, the gay pride parade, attacking human rights defenders. They were attacking Roma encampments in Kiev with official sponsorship and funding from the local municipality. And now they don't exist. So we're just living through one of the saddest and most cynical propaganda stunts. And it's bringing us to the brink of nuclear war. So we should be more angry than we currently are. It's really just depressing that there isn't more mobilization by the anti-war movement to the extent that one exists. But this also speaks to another thing we talked about, Mnar, which is just how young people are not so interested in anti-war activism like they might have been in the 60s or 70s.
Well, look at just TikTok. I mean, there's some viral videos out there like, China controls the algorithms of TikTok, right? But that's actually not true. That's actually not the case. The CIA and much of the US intelligence agencies and Canadian intelligence agencies have control over the TikTok algorithms. And what they have done is they've worked directly with TikTok influencers to promote the US-Russia war U.S.-Russia war in Ukraine. And so I think that just like in Syria and during the Maidan coup, the United States and its U.S. intelligence agencies used outlets like BuzzFeed and Vice News to promote those wars. They're now using platforms like TikTok to influence the minds and hearts of young people and to also keep them distracted. I mean, I know teenagers who are Palestinian who are like, why is Ukraine all over TikTok, but videos about Israeli apartheid are being taken down every single day? On YouTube, whose partner is the ADL, who, by the way, the ADL announced this week that, hey, Azov is all good. they're not so bad. I think you tweeted about that too, Max. Let's wrap up the conversation with the ADLs or anything that you want to add. But
well, I mean, what the Anti-Defamation League is run by a former Obama staffer named Jonathan Greenblatt, and so who's running the country right now? Who's running the White House? Do you think Joe Biden is running the White House? Like, this guy looks embalmed. If you actually look at any footage of Joe Biden when he was in the Senate, watch a speech from Joe Biden in the Senate, compare it to now. He's not even alive. It's Weekend at Bernie's, but sadder. And Obama recently spoke at I think it was like a fundraiser for Raphael Warnock, who was running against like another brain damage victim, Herschel Walker. And he said, he's talking about you're having Thanksgiving and, everybody has their crazy uncle and you tolerate Uncle Joe. You let Uncle Joe rant and say his crazy stuff, but you don't put Uncle Joe in a position of power. And he's, you think he's referring to Herschel Walker, but he's talking about Uncle Joe. Who's Uncle Joe? It was like the ultimate Freudian slip. He's talking about Joe Biden.
Mm-hmm.
And so Obama's basically, and the Obama former administration is running the Biden administration, or at least the domestic political side. And Jonathan Greenblatt, the head of the ADL, is essentially a functionary of the Obama-Biden administration. And so if the Biden-Obama administration needs to sponsor some neo-Nazis in Ukraine to get the job done against Russia, then the ADL is going to stop calling that group out, which they used to call the Azov Battalion a hate group. They would condemn them in harsh terms. And now they're telling Alex Rubinstein, our contributor at the Gray Zone, that the Azov Battalion is no longer far right. That was the exact language that Anti-Defamation League used when Alex, I mean, it's a funny backstory. Basically, Jon Stewart, the liberal court jester, so I would just call him a centrist court jester. He hosted this event called the Warrior Games, which is sponsored by the Pentagon, and it took place at Disneyland, where military veterans compete in various athletic competitions. And the Ukrainian military brought a delegation that featured some Azov members, and one of them had neo-Nazi tattoos all over his left arm, so he wore a sleeve when he got his award from Jon Stewart. So it's the funniest story. Jon Stewart gives an award to a neo-Nazi at a Pentagon-sponsored event at Disneyland. Like, how many layers of absurdity can you have? How destroyed is our culture? I mean, how completely gone are we?
That represents how destroyed our culture is right there with that story.
Totally. So Alex went even further, and he filed a report to the Anti-Defamation League of an anti-Semitic incident. Where, because honoring a neo-Nazi, I would say that's pretty bad. And then they came back with this defense of the Azov Battalion to his report months later. So Alex just did a new report. I mean, so the ADL is just this complete tentacle of the White House and what does that mean for like American Jews or world Jewry and the issue of anti-Semitism? It means it's tied to the fate of the Democratic Party and whoever's in power in Washington, according to the ADL. So we as a people or as a faith community are prisoners of partisanship and political gamesmanship. And they've just taken Jews and just totally cheapened what we are and who our actual enemies are.
Well, I mean, the ADL is also a representative of like Israeli interests in the
Yeah.
United States as well. You know, so what that fits in with, as long as there is anti-Semitism, then in a funny way, not in a funny way, but like in a disturbing way, I guess you could say, Israel continues to justify its actions against Palestinians too. It works
Yeah.
in that way.
The ADL is a hate group. The ADL is one of the biggest hate groups.
They are a hate group, and they are the ones who are working with these social media giants to crack down on so-called hate, when they're actually responsible for removing thousands upon thousands of Palestinian posts showcasing Israeli occupation and apartheid and war crimes against them.
Yep. And they won't. They're there to fight hate.
Right.
What is one of the nexus of hate, of apartheid, of fascism, is right there in the country that the ADL was set up to support. And two key security ministers in the incoming Israeli coalition will be ardent followers of the fascist exterminationist Rabbi Meir Kahane, and the ADL has nothing to say.
Nothing. And they'll promote those people like they've been doing with other, fascist leaders in Israel.
Well, they'll call you an anti-Semite for mentioning them. That's their job. And then in doing so, they cheapen the concept, the idea of anti-Semitism. I've been saying that for years. Real anti-Semitism rears its head. Everyone will just shrug and laugh at it, because so many people who are just anti-racist, like Jeremy Corbyn or you, have been called anti-Semites. And I just saw that the LA Times just called MintPress an anti-Semitic group, an anti-Semitic publication. They didn't produce any evidence at all. So the term means nothing.
Led by a Palestinian woman with half my staff being Jewish.
Yeah.
So,
Shout out to Ben Rubenstein, who's live tweeting this. I guess you don't count along with me.
Right.
Or we're anti-Semitic Jews, I guess.
That's right. That's right. Max, this has been such a rich conversation, and I know a lot of our viewers and readers are familiar with your work, but make sure everybody to check out The Gray Zone. A lot of really amazing, important, some of the most important investigative journalism. There's not a lot of us investigative, independent watchdog journalists, around anymore. So make sure to support The Gray Zone and MintPress News as well, where both platforms are covering the permanent war state in all of the think tanks, the military industrial complex, and the very figures that are working behind the scenes to make these wars possible, and who are crafting the messages within social media platforms and within our media to ensure that these wars continue. So thank you so much, Max, for joining us today.
Thanks a lot, Mnar. Thanks to everyone who watched.